Alright, so we're going to read this thing about Dharanis by Lawrence Waddell, Ostasiatische, Zeitschrift, from 1912-13. The Dharani cult in Buddhism, its origin, deified literature, and images, by L.A. Waddell. Men in Jambudvipa, India, who up to this time had been unassociated with the gods, have now been made associated with the gods. Asoka, the Buddhist emperor, in his edict circa 250 BC. Recent research is establishing the fact that early Buddhism was not an atheistic religion, as it is generally represented by Western writers, relying too exclusively on one section of its literature. It is now becoming clear that Buddha himself, despite a tendency towards agnostic idealism, obviously accepted the gods and the current Hindu mythology as part of his working theory of the universe. That the gods and other supernatural beings have always played an important role in the Buddhist religion from its very commencement. And that indeed Buddhism, until it became decidedly theistic from within, was never a religion of the people at all. The evidence for these conclusions has been indicated by me in a recent article, which shows that for a right understanding of Sakya Muni's system, Buddhist iconography cannot be neglected. I have therein traced in detail the origin and evolution of certain of the earliest Buddhist deities from the elemental gods of Vedic times by means of hitherto unidentified images in the ancient sculptures of Bharhut, and from Tibetan and other sources. From this study of early Buddhist iconography, there also emerges evidence to show that the cult of protective spells, parita or Dharani, which is universally practiced by all sections of Buddhists, south as well as north, is not the relatively late intrusion into Buddhism hitherto supposed. It now appears to have existed within Buddhism from the beginning, and from almost unimpeachable testimony, it was probably introduced by Buddha himself. The present article records the records of my attempts to trace the origin of this cult. The results have disclosed important and unsuspected features in the rise of Buddhism which will doubtless interest alike students of that region and of Oriental civilization, as well as anthropologists. This research reveals a striking chain of developments in the history of religious belief, whereby an amulet-loving primitive people, the Indian Aborigines, in the animistic physical stage of conception of nature, supplemented their fetish charms by charmed spoken words, what I would term idealized fetishes, and on the introduction of writing, circa 600 BC, seized upon the concrete representations of these words, or Dharani, as supernatural fetishes, or Deva Nagari, or abode of the gods, and in contact with a higher theism, Vedic Brahmanism, and a nihilistic idealism, Buddhism, materialized their spelled charm words into anthropomorphic deities who form a large section of the Buddhist pantheon and whose hitherto unknown origin is now revealed. Definition of Dharani, mantra, vidyā, and parita. The Dharani has not yet been very clearly defined, nor has its literature and cult received much more than incidental notice. The pioneer investigator of Nepalese Buddhism, Brian Hodgson, who seems to have been the first European writer to mention the term, defines it as short, significant forms of prayer similar to the Pancanga, supplementary parts of the Vedas, of the Brahmins. Whoever constantly repeats or wears, made up in little pockets, a Dharani possesses a charmed life. Kasoma, who noted the existence of many of them in his analysis of the Tibetan scriptures, defined it as a mystical treatise, a charm, a formula. Burnouf, in 1844, noted that he failed to distinguish between the Dharani and the Brahmanist mantra. Vasiliev, who subjected some of them to detailed examination, considered them generally to be interior to and independent of the tantras in which they were mostly embedded, though in his opinion foreign to primitive Buddhism. Rajendra L. Mitra supplied abstracts of several from Nepal and elsewhere they are curiously referred to. The Dharani I would define as a Buddhist spell of stereotyped formulas, an exoteric device of animistic origin, adapted by Buddhists for the purpose primarily of protecting parita, superstitious humanity against specific fears and dangers in the external world by the outward means to which it had long accustomed. It is the Buddhist analog of the mantra, or secret sacrificial spell of Brahmanism, from which parent religion it was directly derived eclectically, along with most of the other elements of Buddhism, and mantra is still occasionally used to designate the sets of Kabbalistic words within the larger Dharani. It consists of short talismanic formulas of words or verses, sometimes in the shape of a sutra or discourse, usually ascribed to Buddha and credited with holding Sanskrit dharana, so basically concentration or focus, irresistible magical power, which is exerted each time the formula is repeated or remembered, or in the written form worn as an amulet. It is addressed to particular spirits or deities whom it propitiates or coerces. Avalokita wearing charm boxes. Latterly, its power was extended as a luck-compelling talisman to encompass all worldly desires, to achieve miracles, and mystically for spiritual advancement by shortcuts to bodhisattveship in paradise or to nirvana itself. The word Dharani literally means the holder or vessel of charmed power. For the Pali or Prakrit dharana, holding or supporting, from the Sanskrit root dri, to hold, Tibetan gzungs. The term in this religious sense is not current in Brahmanism and seems to have been coined by the Buddhists, as was their wont to distinguish their terminology from their parent rival. Nor is there definite evidence of its use in primitive Buddhism, where its recognized synonym vidyā was employed. This latter term signifies the holder of supernatural knowledge or art, vidyā. Vidyā in Pali, vijja or vijja, is one of the 8 or 10 miraculous arts or powers, riddhi, the riddhi, ascribed to Buddha and other Arhat saints. In a general sense, Dharani is also applied to the whole sutra in which the charmed formula is embedded as well as the formula itself. The date when this term seems to have been introduced will appear later. The Pali epithet parita, Sanskrit paritra, protection or defense, is in use among Southern Buddhists to devote that class of charm treaties or sutra ascribed to Buddha, which the Mahayanists termed Dharani. It is the word, as we will see, sanctified apparently by the use of Buddha himself. Importance of the Dharani in practical Buddhism. To the majority of professing Buddhists, who belong mainly to races who are inveterate amulet users, the Dharani or parita represents perhaps the most cherished practical element in the Buddhist religion. The average layman, to whom the subtle abstractions of Buddhist doctrine are incomprehensible, readily understands through long traditional use the practical value of a tangible protective charm. With his strong instinct of self-preservation, he especially respects and treasures that one which is credited with surpassing all others, through the all-surpassing power of the victorious Lord, the Jina Bhagavat, the Buddha. Such an irresistible talisman he finds no difficulty in believing can protect him from evil spirits during life, act as a panacea for all ills, and also be his guard after death on his long journey to the western paradise of the Mahayanists, or Indra's paradise of the Hinayanists, or to the goal of the small minority, nirvana. Most also of the monks pin their faith more or less upon spells. The wide prevalence of spells in both divisions of Buddhism from remote times has not been yet sufficiently recognized. In the early mythology, Indra inscribes them on his banners, and in early Buddhist sculptures at Barut in Sanchi, figure 2, and in many of the fine Greco-Buddhist sculptures of the earliest centuries of our era, which I procured from the Swat Valley for the Indian government, the gods as well as men are depicted as wearing charm boxes. See figure 1. Throughout the Buddhist world, whether it be in Burma, Ceylon, or Tibet, the outbreak of sicknesses or other trouble, it is to the Dharani or paritta that people turn. Throughout the Buddhist world, whether it be in Burma, Ceylon, or Tibet, on the outbreak of sickness or other trouble, it is to the Dharani or paritta that the people turn. In Ceylonese and Burmese Buddhism, the use of the spell sutras entitled paritta, protection or defense, is conspicuous. All Southern Buddhists implicitly believe that these spells were actually introduced, sanctioned, and uttered by Buddha on evidence that, which as we shall see afterwards shall see, appears to justify this belief in regard to some of them. The practice in Ceylon has been described in detail by Hardy and others. Childers notes in regard to it, there is a collection called Parittam, or Protection, Sinhalese Pirit, which consists of the Peacock's Hymn, see Mayuri Dharani No. 14, and a number of short hymns and sermons of a similar character taken from the Tripitaka. It is publicly read on certain occasions with a view to warding off the influence of evil spirits, Amanusa, Yaka, Bhuta, etc. There are several versions of it, some containing more hymns than others. One of the spells in the Brahmajala Sutta is to ward off arrows, and a charmed thread is mentioned in the Mahavamso. In the monasteries, a special hall is set apart for the reading of the Paritta and called Paritagam. The Mahavamso contains several references to the systematic uses of the Paritta's charms by the Buddhist monks in Ceylon for the purpose of compelling rain, etc. The wise and prudent man, King Sirisenkha Bodhi, circa AD 673, caused the religious Paritta to be rehearsed by priests of learning wherever he found them. Chapter 46, verse 5. During a great drought in the reign of King Parakama Bahu, circa 1240 AD, when the harvests withered and famine seemed certain, and the inhabitants of Lanka or Ceylon were everywhere oppressed with terror, the king caused diverse kinds of offerings to be made to the three sacred objects, or Triratna, the Satyas, or relic towers, the Bodhis, sacred trees from the Bodhi tree at Gaya, and also to the Natha, or Lord Spirits, and Matya, the god Maitreya, the Buddhist Messiah, and other mighty gods that were worthy of honor. And he assembled together the great priesthood, and with the ceremonies that were due, made them chant the Paritta. And when he had duly borne the tooth relic in procession round the city, he prayed and resolved in his mind, saying, "Let there be rain." And lo, there arose great clouds on every side. And they shone with lightnings, and great thunderings followed. And clouds began to pour down rain, and made an end to the great drought, and caused people to rejoice, and despoiled the famine, and decked the regions around with beauty, and refreshed the harvests of the land. And the dwellers of Lanka praised the virtues of the king and the virtues of the king of sages, saying again and again, "By the power of Buddha alone do these clouds thus give showers of rain." Who therefore among the gods, Brahmas, or men is able to know the greatness of Buddha's virtues? Chapter 8, verse 1 through 9, 10 through 13, page 298. The king, Kittisiri Rajasiha, circa AD 1747, bestowed favors on the priests who had come from Rakanga, Burma, and the priests of Lanka, Ceylon, and many novices who had entered the church, such as robes and the like, and he caused them to receive the Paritta. Chapter 9, verse 26, page 345. Actual Dharanis also have been found in Ceylon, as recorded by Max Muller from the cave of St. Peacock. a location of especial interest in the history of the Buddhist charms, as we will see. In the frankly theistic division of Buddhism, the Mahayana, the use of such spells is in universal use under the general title of Dharani. Some idea of the diversity of uses to which they are put may be gathered from the list of Dharani appended to this article. The formulas told on the rosaries and twirled in prayer wheels are also condensed Dharani. Origin of Dharani cult in pre-Buddhist Vedic period. The Dharani had its origin manifestly in the pre-Buddhist and even pre-Vedic animistic superstitions of the Indian Aborigines. In India, the belief in animistic charms is so deeply rooted from time immemorial that even at the present day, in no region of the world except perhaps Western Africa, is the use of protective charms and amulets more common. These protective amulets are still to be found in India in all stages of development, from the most primitive and pre-animistic. In the most elementary form, a natural object is picked up and worn as a magical fetish. The protective force exerted by it seems to be regarded less as spiritual or supernatural than as a physical terrestrial force, such as electricity or magnetism. The great majority, however, are truly animistic, in which the spirit has become independent of or detachable from the object in which it resides. By a crude idealism, it may also reside in its name, both where this is chanted or incanted, the proper charm, later Carmen, or when written or spelled, the literal spell. This latter, of course, could not arise till the introduction of writing, which was not till about the 6th century BC in India. Already in India, at the beginning of the Vedic period, which is usually placed by its literature at 1500 to 200 BC, though the actual Aryan invasion into northern India probably happened before 2000 BC, the prevalence of deadly spells and hostile black magic is noted as existing among the Aboriginal Indians as dark practices abhorrent to the more simple genial Aryan sages. Thus, Vasishtha, invoking the god Agni, fire, exclaims with reverence to the Aborigines, "Let me die this day if I ever practiced witchcraft or ever destroyed any man's vital power by spells." And he prays Indra for protection of the Aryans against the fury of the wizards, and the wiles of the witches, and for the destruction of both. Yet the Aryan invaders themselves appear to have introduced other spells of their own. The Proto-Aryans of the Iranian period, before the separation of the Indian branch, about 2000 BC, used spells against enemies, poison, disease, etc. And the earliest spells mentioned in the Vedas are associated with Agni, Latin ignis, the Aryan god of fire, celestial as the sun, also terrestrial. The first of all Aryan gods to receive worship, and who already had a defined ritual before the separation from the Iranian stock, which became preeminently fire-worshipping. The important bearing of this will be evident later when it will be seen that fire worship plays a prominent part in the Dharani literature and presumes for the latter a remote origin. Agni is represented in the Rig Vedas as upholding the sky by his spell, and he is invoked to protect from evil. In kindling a fire, Agni, to him before sunrise, seemed to exercise a magical effect on the sunrise. The mystic Brahmanist sacrificial exclamation Svaha is especially associated with Agni in the Veda, where it is represented, as it still is, as the call to the gods in making an oblation, and he, as the especial god of sacrifice, is identified with it. In later Brahmanist mythology, Svaha is the wife or daughter of Agni, fire, and the goddess presiding over burnt offerings. Svaha is usually the concluding word of the Dharani formulas. The early Aryan priests, nevertheless, before the Brahmins raised themselves into a hereditary caste, do not seem to have employed spells or ritualistic magic extensively. This did not happen until the Aborigines had gradually absorbed their Aryan invaders by intermarriage and induced them to admit the dark host of Indian departmental and local gods and demons into the restricted pantheon of the great elemental anthropomorphic gods of the Aryans. By about 600 BC, i.e. shortly before the advent of Buddha, circa 576 through 487 BC, the aboriginal cult of spells and incantations had freely permeated and leavened the higher theism of the Brahmins and of mixed Indo-Aryan population that had arisen. The Atharva Veda, dating to about 600 BC, is mainly a collection of spells, sorcery, and superstitious domestic rites, and it breathes a demonist spirit very different from the higher theism of the Rig Veda. In the latter, the great gods are generally friendly to man and are approached with respectful confidence by mantras, which were hymns of dignified praise or grateful prayer to the elemental gods for warding off the demons, mostly Rakshas. But in the Atharva period, the world is peopled by darkly scowling demons inspiring abject fear. The Brahmins are governors rather than priests, and the mantras, ceasing to be prayers couched in intelligible language, become incantations of Kabbalistic stereotyped formulas which force the unwilling or unfriendly gods and spirits by the magical power of the mantra. A special potency was attached to the monosyllables called the germ or seed, vidyā, of the mantras. These syllables were esteemed mystical word essences, vidyā hriti, which were alleged by Manu to have been milked from the Vedas by Brahma as the creator Prajapati, who uttered the word bur, which became this earth, bu, Sanskrit for earth. Bura became the firmament, and svar the sky. Here already then we have the lineal prototype of the Dharani, indeed the Dharani itself without its Buddhist envelope, and its aboriginal origin and pre-Vedic superstitions is clearly disclosed. The mystical efficacy of the incantations as adopted by Brahmanism was doubtless enhanced by the introduction of the art of writing about this time. The awe inspired on the primitive Indian mind by the use of letters can be imagined from the astonishing effect produced by letters upon savages in Africa in modern times, creating the impression that it was supernatural. That this was the effect of the Indian mind, we have evidence in present day for the alphabet, namely, the abode or city of the gods, Devanagari. Hence, the reduction of the oral spells to writing must have enormously intensified their mystery, and also tended to popularize them by fixing them in visible and permanent form, and thus rendering them portable, less costly and more freely available for use as amulets. Date of introduction of spells into Buddhism and authorship by Buddha. At the epoch of Sakya Muni's birth, about 567 BC, we thus find from contemporary sources, the Brahmanas and Atharva Veda, that Brahmanism, from which Buddhism presently issued, was already deeply saturated with the aboriginal sorcery and demonology, and that the originally bright and frank yet stern character of the Aryan had on Indian soil in the mixed Indo-Aryan breed developed into a darkly contemplative, introspective nature. These outstanding facts need to be clearly kept in mind in attempting to trace the origins of Buddhism, and especially in our present quest for the point at which the popular cult of spells crept into that creed. In this atmosphere of self-absorbed speculation and rampant sorcery, the young Gautama of a non-Aryan Sakya tribe was born and bred up within the malarial forest swamps at the foot of the Himalayas, at a site which I had the privilege to discover. Some direct glimpses of the Yaksa and other aboriginal demonist worship at his home are given in the legendary accounts of his life. The prevailing charm craze of this period entered into every department of the daily life and was based upon sympathetic magic. as is seen in the numerous detailed examples which I've translated from Tibetan sources. It is significant of the remote age of the tradition recorded in the Tibetan texts that the term there used for Veda is invariably the Sanskrit Rig, which is the oldest section of that literature. Whether Sakyamuni, after he became the Buddha, about 547 to 487 BC, ever actually employed spells himself, as he is declared to have done in the Pali texts, may be doubted by Western readers accustomed only to hear of the higher truths, and nothing of what are considered to be the lower elements of his creed. Yet several different Pali texts, which are generally regarded as authentic, agree in describing a circumstantial incident in which Buddha issued a charm against snakebite and all other accidents, declaring that he had found it to be effective and recommending his monks use it, and which, as a fact, the Buddhist monks from about this time have continued to do till the present day, when it is in practice from Ceylon to Peking. The incident is related in the Kulavagga and Anguttara Nikaya, which are considered to have been composed anterior to 383 BC, and another version recurs in the Jatakas, number 203, Kandavata, and in the Tibetan canon. It is so important historically as well as serving obviously as the model from which the spells and Dharanis of later periods were invented, that I here quote it from Jataka. At one time, the Blessed One was staying in Sravasti in the Jetavana garden of Anathapindika. At that time, a certain monk was bitten by a snake and died. Then a number of monks came to the Blessed One, and after saluting him, they informed him of the fatal occurrence. Surely, replied Buddha, that monk cannot have displayed a friendly spirit toward the 4 snake kings and their races, for if he had done so, he would not have been bitten by a snake and killed. Therefore, he added, for the sake of your own protection, security, and safety, Paritta, I advise you to display a friendly spirit towards the 4 snake kings and their races. He then pronounced these 4 verses of the charm. Virupaka, snakes I love. Arapatha, snakes I love. Chabyaputa, snakes I love. Kanha, Gautama's snakes I love. With the footless I keep friendship, and friendship with the 2-footed. With the 4-footed I keep friendship, and friendship with the many-footed. Let not the footless harm me, let not the 2-footed, let not the 4-footed harm me, nor harm me from the many-footed. All that exist, all that live, and all that will live hereafter, one and all may they experience good things. May none of them fall into sin. He then added, unlimited is the power of the Buddha, the law and congregation, while that of all creeping things is limited and finished with the hymn, my safety, Paritta, is secured, my protection is secured. Let all creatures leave me in peace, so I will praise the Blessed One. I will praise all that through him are saved, and the 7 Buddhas who have passed away. The Jataka version states in its commentary that before the last hymn, Buddha explained to them that the first verse they should establish friendship with the 4 Nagarajas and their races, and by the second with snakes and fishes, men and birds, elephants, horses, and other quadrupeds, scorpions, centipedes, and other multipeds, and thus become proof against being bitten or injured by any of them. The third would serve them as a request, by reason of that friendship, to be saved from all danger from those different classes of beings. The 4th would show their feeling of goodwill to all creatures. Now this ascription of the charm to Buddha in those orthodox early Pali texts, and its repetition in the Jatakas, gives it a semi-historical character which leads irresistibly to the conclusion that the council of monks who collected the text within a few months of Buddha's death must have implicitly believed that the Buddha had uttered this charm. As this council met so near to the period of Buddha's lifetime, it therefore seems probable that Buddha actually did utter this charm, and in similar if not identical words. See Figure 3. Another of the spells ascribed to Buddha in the Pali scriptures is one alleged to have been uttered by him to the great Yaksa, General Manibhadra, and the same appears in the Sanskrit texts. Indian Buddhists supplicating the Bodhisattva Avalokita for protection against snakes, wild beasts, etc., as did their ancestors, the historical Buddha. From 7th to 8th century AD, painting in Ajanta cave, the Bodhisattva derives his magic art, vidyā, from the Buddha seated on his crown, Usnisa. And the two top corner spirits carrying wreaths are Vidyadharas bringing this magic. In his left hand he carries a flask of revivifying elixir and a rosary to register the spells. For detailed description, see article by writer in IA 1893, 9. How Buddha's snake spell Paritta became the peafowl Dharani. The above conclusion gains strong support from the fact that Buddha is universally believed to be the author of this snake charm by all sections of Buddhists, northern and southern, laity and monks, amongst all of whom this charm is still in use at the present day. In Ceylon, Siam, and Burma, it is the most commonly used of all the Paritta charms. By Mahayanists, it is widely employed under the title of the Great Peafowl, or Mayuri, Queen of the Magic Art. Maha Mayuri Vidya Rajni, and it forms the chief of one of the group spells entitled the Five Protectors, Pancharaksa, see list, or in the Tibetan, the Five Umbrella Dharanis. Gzungs Dhruva Lunya, in Sanskrit, Pancha Chatra Dharani. This great peafowl Mayuri spell or Dharani is merely a slightly expanded form of the above Pali snake charm of the Kulavagga, as has been pointed out by Dr. Hornell, who has critically translated this Mayuri spell from its version in the 4th century AD Bauer manuscript. That Sanskrit version differs from the Pali mainly in the insertion of the names of a few specific diseases and the evil eye against which its influence is extended, with the positive gift of preserving bodily health. It appears to be identical with the versions current in Nepal, China, and Tibet. How did the epithet of great peafowl become applied to this ancient snake spell? It was, manifestly, I think, suggested by other Jataka story ascribed to Buddha in which he relates how, in a previous existence as a golden peacock, in the Great Peacock, or Mahamora Jataka, number 491, he uttered a series of protective spells for his own safety which are still favorite Paritta charms in Ceylon. They comprised, as Buddha is stated to say, a Brahma spell to the sun to preserve himself safe in his own feeding ground, and another to the Buddhas who had passed away, Tathagata, to keep him from harm, and another spell to preserve himself and keep off evil. In this great Peacock Jataka, the charm is described as protecting against serpents as well as against dangerous men, birds, etc., and as saving from sin, which reared itself like a cobra spreading its hood. But why is Buddha associated with the peacock and the latter with snakes, Naga? Outwardly, the association of the peacock with snakes is naturally appropriate, as it is a common Indian observation that the peacock preys upon snakes, and thus, by sympathetic magic, the peacock could preserve against snakebite. The charm, however, is not merely for snakebite, but expressly extends to injuries also from two-footed and four or more footed creatures, natural and supernatural. It in fact includes the whole class of Naga snake spirits who changed shapes at will, and who were regarded by the Aborigines as the chief causes of all the evils which inflicted mankind, a belief doubtless cognate with the Assyrian myth of the old serpent, as modern research is now tending to show the oneness of the ancient civilizations. Herein lies the deeper and real significance, it appears to me, of the peacock snake symbolism of this wide-embracing spell. By it, the Mahayanists appear to have engrafted Buddha upon the great archaic sunbird myth of the pre-anthropomorphic age of mythology. In this myth, which was common to all archaic civilizations of the East, from Egypt through Babylon and India to China, the sun, conceived as a great winged bird, was the benefactor of mankind by destroying the hostile spirits of darkness. This association of Buddha with the sunbird occurs freely in the Jatakas, as I have shown, and I have found it in the Bharhut sculptures at a period manifestly before the Jatakas received their present form, and their inscribed sculptures reveal the association of Buddha with the sun myth in a yet fluid embryo stage, before it had undergone development into the divine Buddha Amitabha and his Western paradise, the goal of the majority of Buddhists since the beginning of our era. The physical conception of this sunbird varies from the eagle-like roc of the Iranian myth to the phoenix or fang of the Chinese, conventionally represented like a cross between a peacock and an Argus pheasant, the Vedic golden-winged bird, which later became the fierce Brahmanist Garuda, that the Buddhist transformed for their sunbird in the Jatakas into the milder golden goose and golden peacock, though Buddha also is recorded as describing himself as the Garuda king who preached the law. The phenomenal epithet of golden that is applied to this peacock form of Buddha evidently implies that no earthly bird was intended, but the yellow golden-winged bird, as the sun is termed in the Vedas. This, I suggest, is the real symbolism of the geese on the capitals of the Asokan pillars, of the golden geese surmounting the standards, Taguin Dang, erected in front of every Burmese temple and monastery, and of the prayer flags of the Tibetans with their inscribed Garuda and snake legend. This, so it appears to me, is the source of the Mahayanists' name of the famous peacock charm of the Buddha. The peacock is Buddha himself, deified as the sun, the sunbird, the golden peacock, alias golden goose, as he is represented calling himself in so many of the Jatakas. See Figure 4. The spell he uttered in this capacity becomes feminine according to the ordinary grammatical rules for such words as saying, speech, or treatise, hence from the form Mayuri. By its means, the spell-loving Indian Buddhist would obtain his defense against the host of malignant spirits, chiefly Nagas, by the traditional victor of the latter, yet at the same time made a personified reflex of Buddha himself, one of whose common modes and titles represents him as bestowing the blessing of fearlessness, abhyakara, upon the demon-fearing populace. In the later post-Vedic period, when Brahmins developed the sunbird as the Garuda into a bird of monstrous ferocity, representing the destructive aspect of the sun, and analogous to Moloch, the destructive fierce form of the Semitic sun god Baal, we find the new spells invented by the Buddhists to overpower the Nagas reflect this type. Thus, the new spells to procure reasonable rain for the crops or against the snake race are entitled the Iron Beak, number 10, the Black Iron Beak, number 9, the Copper Beak, the Thunderbolt Iron Beak of the Sky, number 31 and 33, and the Thunderbolt Claw, number 32, all clearly indicating the Garuda type of the sunbird in keeping with its more demonistic character, as conceived by later Brahmins. This change in the character of the bird in the bird snake spells tends to confirm the view of the identity of the golden peacock with the sunbird. The probability that Buddha himself was the author of this peacock snake charm, and in practically the same form as it is found in the Pali texts, gains support from other circumstances beside these previously stated. Sakyamuni, from his free use and his dogmatic of the stereotyped phraseology of ancient Indian medical science, was presumably familiar with that art in which spells were freely used and formed an essential part of the treatment. There are several medical snake spells in the Atharva Veda, probably dating to before Buddha's time. His dreamy idealism had much in common with the loose, crude idealism of the lower amulet-loving races, which leads them to confuse the name or image of a thing with the thing itself, and so tends towards the sympathetic magic on which the use of charms is based. His favorite right-hand disciple, Maudgala is frequently represented in the scriptures as notoriously addicted to the practice of spells and magic arts, for which on occasions he is reproved by the master. This reproval does not necessarily imply that Buddha forbade the use of spells altogether. There is much that is contradictory in the statements attributed to Buddha in the scriptures, yet it seems probable that there is a basis of historical truth in these numerous legends that Maudgala did practice spells, for no object was to be gained by gratuitously blackening the character of a chief disciple. It indicates at least an atmosphere of spells existed within the order in Buddha's day. Altogether, then, the semi-historical accounts in the Pali scriptures, supplemented by other evidence above cited, make it probable that Buddha did actually utter the peacock snake protective spells, and in similar if not identical words to those found in the Pali texts. The very mildness of these spells and the introduction therein of some doctrinal teaching suggests to my mind the probability that Buddha, just as he utilized with rare tact the popular fashion of storytelling in the form of the Jatakas to enforce his religion's lessons, so likewise has he utilized for the same purpose the popular cult of charms on which the people pinned their faith. By this means he could instill some ethical teaching and belief in the three holy ones, whilst at the same time, through his spell, he could impart to the fear-stricken Naga worshippers confidence to face the dangers they would otherwise not have dared to do, and thereby alleviate some of the human misery of his time. Development of Dharani literature and doctrine. Introduced by Buddha as it appears to have been, the Paritta spell proved to be so popular that it underwent great development, especially in the hands of the Mahayanists. After Buddha's death, further sayings of the master, manifestly invented on the model of the peacock snake, were formed into a separate body of the scriptures, Paratam or Dharani Pitaka. This literature was afterwards raised by a section of the Mahayanists to the position of a special jnana, mantra jnana, as a special means of quick conveyance to nirvana or to the more popular goal of Amitabha's Western Paradise of the Golden Peacock. And latterly the spells were deified. The sacred charmed words believed to have issued from the mouth of the Blessed One were materialized into anthropomorphic energetic gods and goddesses, each bearing characteristic symbols as attributes, and made the object of recognized worship. The first collection of Dharani or Paritta literature is stated by Hui Sang, circa 635 AD, and the special meeting of the Mahasangha is usually placed at Vaisali about 100 years later, to have been made shortly after Buddha's death by the Greater Assembly, Mahasangha. He records the Indian tradition that immediately after the first council held at Rajgir by Kasyapa a few months after Sakyamuni's death, to collect the sayings of the master, the Greater Assembly formed 5 collections, of which the 5th was the Dharani Pitaka, or vidyā Pitaka. The statement by Hui Sang is unconfirmed by the fragmentary evidence for that dark period of history, yet it is thus possible that the peacock snake and other parittas may have been set apart thus early in addition to their version in the Tripitaka. Be this as it may, we find in both divisions of Buddhism that the spells form collections separate from the other scriptures, though most are also contained therein. In southern Buddhism, they form the Paratam, and in the so-called northern, the Dharani or vidyā Pitaka, an arrangement which had obviously been in existence in India for many centuries previous to the date of Hui Sang. The great body of Dharani literature of the Mahayanist Buddhists, I find on critical examination, may be separated into different strata of manifestly different ages by the character of their contests as tested by the stage of development in the Buddhist mythology and doctrine displayed by them. Another criterion to some extent is afforded by the ascertained dates of translation of the Indian texts into Chinese and Tibetan, though this affords no positive initial date for their composition. Examined in this way, the Dharani literature, of which I appended a list of the more common texts, appears to me to fall broadly into three main types corresponding to the main developments in Buddhism with which the Dharanis seem to run parallel. 1. The primitive simple sutra type, or Hinaya stage, e.g. peacock and peacock snake paritas, or Mayuri, and Atanitya. And 2. The developed scholastic metaphysical sutra type, the Mahayana early stage, the Prajnaparamita and Hridaya, or Prajnaparamita Hridaya. And 3. Mystic esoteric tantra type, late Mahayana with Mantrayana and Vajrayana, Usnisa Vyaja Sitatapatra and Vajra Vidarana. Primitive or Hinayana type of spell. This, the lowest stratum of Buddhist spells, presents nothing inconsistent in its mythology with a date within Buddha's lifetime, 5th century BC, down to 1st century BC. There is no reference to any superhuman Buddha or Bodhisattva or other specific Buddhist deity other than the god Maitreya. The gods and spirits that are mentioned are those of Brahmanism of the later Vedic period. The peacock parita and the peacock snake Mayuri spell satisfy these conditions. Their mythology is generally that of the Jataka period. The Sanskrit version of the Mayuri is in part verbatim with the Jataka, and Buddha receives in it the archaic epithet of the Brahma. The spell of the Yaksa king, Vaisravana, entitled Atanitya, seems also to belong to this early period. It is a favorite in Ceylon, where it is used to protect against evil spirits and for exorcisms. It also occurs in the Tibetan canon translated from the Pali. A stanza of this sutra is introduced into the Siddharma Pundarika, which Dr. Kern recognized as a later insertion there, though it now appears to be much older. To this period also may belong a similar spell called Sahasra Pramardini, one of the 5 protectors, Pankaraksa, purported to have been delivered by Buddha to deliver his favorite city Vaisali from earthquake and storms. The Sanskrit epithet for these early spells is not Dharani, but either Sutra or Vidyā Rajaya, or Queen of the Magic Art. This title appears to associate it with early designation of Vidyadhara. This latter term is used in Ceylon, where it denotes men performing wonders by the aid of mantras, which is in keeping with the Buddhist application. Now, at the south gate of Barhut, there is the inscribed title Vijapi Vidyadhara, which restores to Vidyadhara Vijayan. No photograph is given of the sculpture it labels, but as it adjoins some Asparas nymphs, it may designate a leader of the Vidyadhara spirits of Siva's heaven who had the magical power of changing shapes at will. Vidyadhara is a serpent catcher in the Kinari Avadana. In this regard, it is notable that Vijaya is the title of some of the commoner Vidyadhara or Dharani, and may possibly be related in some way to its namesake on this Buddhist monument of the 2nd century BC, which depicts amulets in common use by the people as well as by the deities. Vidya mantra is often written in the Tibetan texts as Vija mantra, which is obviously a survival of the Prakrit or Pali form Vija. Vidya, with its meaning of higher knowledge or art, seems to have connoted frequently the art of medicine, so that most of the spells which are termed Vidya purport to cure disease, though many Dharanis also are expressly intended for disease. The recital of the Trividya or Trividya formula, frequently repeated on the rosary by Hinayanists. Also, the categories of attributes of Buddha are supposed to exert a certain magical efficacy which makes these practically spells. The early Mahayana metaphysical type. In this period appear in the literature the metaphysical Buddha, the divine bodhisattvas of Avalokita, Manjusri, Vajrapani, and others, which suggest an initial date from about 1st century BC, and all are Mahayanist. To this period belongs undoubtedly the heart or kernel of transcendental wisdom, Prajnaparamita Hridaya. The Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, containing the germ or essentials in shorter form of the great Mahayanist classic of that name of the scholastic period, contains no reference to the metaphysical Buddhist divinities, but in its usual form it mentions Avalokita. It is one of the most favorite Dharanis and is termed one by Huyen Tsang. In Tibetan it bears the older title of the great Vidyā mantra, Rigpa Chen Pois Nyangs. Its enlarged form in 10,000 stanzas was translated into Chinese in 179 AD, thus presuming for its germ a much more remote antiquity. It is ascribed to Buddha and is put into the mouth of Kasyapa. The Saddharma Pundarika, which existed some centuries before 250 AD, when it was translated into Chinese, states that that volume is a magical spell protective especially for preachers, and that the name of Avalokita is a spell for trouble and for averting the spells of others. This work contains, in chapter 21, a collection of spells under the title of Dharani, one of which is the Atanatiya, which is, as we have seen, common to the Hinayana and thus presumably much older. The term Dharani first appears about this time. The first occurrence of this name I have found is in the epic of the Lalita Vistara, properly a Hinayana work and dating before the Saddharma Pundarika. There, amongst the great metaphysical bodhisattvas, is mentioned the king of Dharani lords, Dharanisvara Raja. This is a Brahmanist title of Shiva as Lord of the world, and Dharani is Lakshmi as the earth goddess, but this bodhisattva of the Lalita Vistara occupies in the Saddharma a similar position in the list of the great bodhisattvas to that Dharani Dhara, with whom he is presumably identical. Dharani Raja is also the name of a Buddhist text. To this period seem also to belong the remaining three of the five protectors or umbrellas, Pancaraksa or Pankachatra, the basis of which is the great peacock snake or Mayuri. They are Sitavati, purporting to have been delivered by Buddha to his son Rahula to protect the latter from ferocious animals and evil planets, and Mantra Nudarani, delivered to Ananda to avert disease from Vasyali, town number 14. Pratisara, the most mythological of the five and presumably the latest, which purports to deliver from all sorts of specified evils and physical dangers, number 16. The collection of these early charms to form the five protectors or umbrellas seems to present nothing inconsistent with a date to before the 3rd or 4th century or a few centuries earlier. The use of this collection for the swearing in of Buddhist witnesses in Nepalese courts of justice presumes the tradition of their having been in existence from a very remote time. The term umbrella to denote the warding off of harm is developed in the later periods. Mystic development of spells. The limits of this article forbid any detailed account of the great developments in the doctrine of spells, which set in with the mystic Tantra period about the 5th century AD. This resulted in an increased number of Dharanis of a mystical type. These are represented as having been delivered by Buddha whilst in a state of trance, absorbed in deep meditation, samadhi, and they are deemed to confer supernatural power over the gods. By repeating them as in Brahmanist spells of the Atharva Veda, the divinities are compelled to attend to the human utterer and to control the elements favorably to him. By their use, the Buddhist monks from Bhavaviveka of the 6th century AD to Tsongkhapa of the 15th century, and his successors, the Grand Lamas and their priests, compel the bodhisattvas to comply with their wishes. The Dharani also becomes an expiatory sacrificial offering which is cast to the evil spirits and lent itself more readily to exorcist practices. To this period obviously belongs that class of charm purporting to have been delivered by Buddha in a supernatural manner, which, whilst immersed in a samadhi trance and attended by miraculous signs. Thus, the Usnisa Vijaya Dharani, number 29, is described as having issued as a voice from the crown of the head, Usnisa of Buddha, whilst in a trance, and is hence named the all-victorious Dharani of the crown. The idea of the umbrella to ward off harm, as suggested in the alternative title of the Five Protectors, becomes the white umbrella, invincible against others, the great turner away of harm. Sita Atapatra Aparajita Maha Pratyamagira. Number 27. And each of these elements in the title also become separate charms in themselves. Thus we have Aparajita and Pratyamagira as independent Dharanis. Mantrayana, or salvation by spells. The idea that a mystic compelling force was held by the Dharanis led to their erection by one of the section of Buddhists into a special vehicle, a third yana, which they termed mantrayana, for more speedy and certain conveyance of the utterer to nirvana than by the other two means. This sect commands many votaries in Tibet and in Japan, in which latter country it is known as the Shingon or Shingon-shu sect. In this practice, importance is attached to mystic gestures of the hands, mudra, and peculiar intonations in uttering the spells, as in other ancient rituals. A later offshoot from this doctrine is the Vajrayana, which is of a frankly more demonistic type. In it, the chief energies are regarded as personifications of the thunderbolt or Vajra, which seems a travesty upon the historical mendicant monk, Sakyamuni, upon his lowly seat under the Bodhi tree at Bodhi Gaya, which was afterwards poetically termed the Vajra seat, or Vajrasana, from which the idea of the thunderbolt appears to me to have originated. List of common Dharani and Parida. Abhyakara, bestower of fearlessness, averts harm generally. Aparajita, invincible against others, offensive and defensive. Aparamita, anusamsa, for unlimited virtue. Atanatiya, against yaksas and evil spirits. Chanda, Bhattarika, Raksa, revered Durga. Ganapati, Hridaya, heart of Kubera, for worldly goods and good fortune. Graha Matrika, against adverse planets inimical to life and for rebirth in Indra's heaven. Jamguli Vidyā, snake charm. Loha Kala Tunda, the black iron beak, against Nagas for seasonable rain. Loha Tunda, the iron beak of Garuda, against Nagas. Mahakala, the great dark one, for hidden treasure. Mahamaniguya, for rebirth in paradise. Mahamani Vipula, the great jewel lotus. Om Mani, formula of rebirth in paradise. Maha Mantra Nudarini, to banish plague from Vaisali. Maha Mayuri Vidya Rajni, the great peafowl queen of magic, for snake bite and other injuries and diseases. Maha Pratisara, against all sorts of worldly evils. Maha Sahasra Pramardini, against earthquakes and storms at Vaisali. Maha Sitavata, against hostile planets and ferocious beasts for Rahula. Mahamega, the great cloud, asking for rain. Manibhadra, for defense and world by health, for defense and world by wealth. Mayuri Vidya Garbi, spirit or heart of the peahen, against snakes and all sorts of evils. And Parna Savari, the leaf-clad sylph, for health and cure by forest drugs. Also Prajna Paramita Hridaya, for intelligence and good fortune. Pratyamagira, the averter of harm, for all sorts of protection. Tsara Vidya, spell of the 6 letters against disease, etc. Sadmukhi, spell of the 6 doors, for closing doors of rebirth in the 6 states. Sitatapatra, the white umbrella, great averter. Usnisa Jvala, flaming crown, to avert harm. Usnisa Vijaya, Sarva Tathagata, all victorious crown, to avert all kinds of harm, cure disease, and procure long life. Vajra Hridaya, the heart of the thunderbolt, to cause fall of thunderbolts against all sorts of evils. Vajra Loha Tunda, thunderbolt iron beak of Garuda. Vajraratiru, thunderbolt claw of Garuda. Vajratunda, thunderbolt beak of Garuda, against Nagas to protect crops and cause seasonable rain. Vajravidarana, shattering thunderbolt to destroy disease and preserve health, purporting to be uttered by bee from within a thunderbolt. Vasundara, holder of wealth for riches. Vidyā Raja Svasa, the breath king of magic, against devils and harm therefrom. Vidyā Uttama, the chief magic art, for prosperity, exorcising evil spirits and curing diseases. And Vijayavati Pratyamagira, all victorious averter of harm. Deification of the Dharani spells. The stages by which the Buddhist spells appear to me to have become deified can only be briefly indicated here. The process by which the Buddhists, as well as the Brahmins, manifestly created their divinities has been described by me elsewhere. 3 of these processes seem to have operated in the deification of the spells, namely, 1. Personification of metaphysical categories, 2. Of ethical qualities, and 3. Of personal titles. Amongst the Hinayanists at an early stage, if not already in Buddha's own lifetime, the 3 holy ones, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, received divine honors. Such abstractions, including that of Buddha when he had passed away, must to the lay mind especially have seemed little different from those of the Vedic deities in popular worship. It is certainly as divinities that this triad is now ordinarily invoked daily by Hinayanists. When the word of Buddha, after being transmitted orally for some generations, was first reduced to writing in India, in the then still somewhat novel sacred characters, the abode of the gods, and to invest the books in which it was inscribed with the character of being materially sacred in themselves. This, doubtless, is the origin of the custom common in Buddhist countries of carrying in procession the volumes of sacred scriptures round areas of persons infested by disease. The books are used as fetish charms. In the early literature, as a fact, the word of Buddha is sometimes termed Bhagavati, or the product of the blessed Lord. Here, the feminine form of Bhagavat lent itself to the suggestion that it denoted a goddess, as it is one of the ordinary titles of Durga in post-Vedic Brahmanism. Whilst Dharani also, the later term for the spell, is the Brahmanist epithet of Lakshmi, as the goddess of the earth or holder of energy, whilst the Brahmanist Vidyadhara, another and early title for the spells, were divine messengers of the heaven of Siva or Kubera, carriers of wreaths and proficients in magic. This no doubt rendered the process of deification of the spell easy. See their representation at the top of the Ajanta cave painting, figure 3. At the beginning of the 5th century AD, Fa Hian noted that the volumes of the Prajnaparamita were worshipped in Indian with offerings of flowers, etc. 2 centuries later, Huin Sang recorded that the female bodhisattva Tara, as the mother of the Buddhas, had come into popularity with the Mahayanists. This was speedily followed by the creation of other divine female bodhisattvas as personified energies. Within the next few centuries, this profuse deification makes itself evident by a large crop of sadhanas, or rituals for the worship of Buddhist divinities, which appear in Tibetan translations from the Sanskrit, giving detailed descriptions of the images and attributes of these gods and goddesses. The avowed object of the sadhana is to enable the votary to recognize each particular divinity in the event of the latter manifesting itself as the result of the use of the compelling spell. By means of these sadhanas, Tibetan Sergub Tabs, I was led to discover the unsuspectedly wide prevalence of Mahayanist Buddhism in India. Its teeming images from the ruined shrines are still to be found scattered over mid-India, Magadha, and were generally regarded as Brahmanical idols. By the precise descriptions in these sadhana, I was able to identify them for the most part easily, and published in 1894 the chief forms of Avalokita and Tara found in India. from this fertile source, which has since been extensively and brilliantly explored by M. Foucher, I here extract a few more descriptions of some of these goddesses whom I have here traced to be deified spells, but in regard to whom these particular sadhanas do not appear to have been hitherto published. Date of deification of the spells. The date of deification of the spells is not indicated in the Dharanis themselves. Indeed, the earlier texts, so far as I have found, do not refer to the spell in terms denoting that it was regarded as a deity at all. The title, usually in the Tibetan versions, is expressed in the masculine gender both in the transliteration of the Sanskrit names and in the translations of the same. This is the case even in the latter tantric type, with such as the great turner aside of harm, Mahapratyambira, the white umbrella, invincible against others, Sitatapatra Aparajita, where only in the interior is the feminine termination introduced, and then manifestly merely in the sense of the word or speech. In the Bauer MS, or manuscript of 400 to 450 AD, the Mayuri spell bears the title of Queen of the Magic Art, but this is a generic epithet and seems merely an eulogistic description of its contents, analogous to King or King of Tantras or Sutras. The title, however, is Buddha's Mother, as Buddha Matrika is interpreted, which is, applied to that spell in 763 to 779 AD, implies that actual deification had been effected before that date. By this time, Tara was being called in Indian texts the mother of all the Tathagatas, that is, the Buddhas, and the same title was applied to the Prajnaparamita. The sadhana rituals containing the descriptions of these spell deities, on the other hand, afford, through the date of their translation into Chinese and Tibetan, a positive clue to the lowest limit for the deification of these spells in India. These texts do not appear in the canon at all, nor in the Tibetan translations of the great commentaries, Tangyur, until the last volumes of the Tantras, where they form three great collections. The first bears the same title of the 100 Sadhanas, as does the collection by Zialu, of which I published selected translations in 1894, and largely in identical words. The Tangyur collection notes in its colophons that it was translated by from the Sanskrit by Abhyakara, who must have lived in the latter end of the 11th or beginning of the 12th century AD, as he was a contemporary of Ramapala of Bengal, a grandson of Mahipala who reigned in 1026 AD. It is significant of Abhyakara's addiction to spells that his conventional portrait represents him as encircled by an enormous serpent. The second collection is not easily dated, but the third is ascribed by Amoghavajra, who was the main introducer of the Dharani cult into China as well as Tibet in 763 to 779 AD. The authorship of the Prajnaparamita Sadhana is assigned with probability to the great teacher Asanga, who lived in the 5th century AD, whilst three sadhanas of the goddess Tara, namely as Vajrati, Ekajata, and Kurakula, are credited to the patriarch Nagarjuna, who lived about the 2nd century AD. The demonist features of these three creations, however, renders such early authorship doubtful. It is thus probable that many of the spells were already deified in the 7th century AD, and the Prajnaparamita and possibly Mayuri and Usnisa Vijaya in the 5th century AD. The possibility that the 2nd century BC divinity at Barhut, inscribed Vijapi Vijadaro, may have had a prototype has been suggested above. Spells conceived as the anthropomorphic deities, chiefly goddesses. In transforming the spells, Parita, Vidyā, or Dharani, into concrete goddesses, the Indian Buddhist monks of about the 5th century AD manifestly conceived these new deities upon the model of Tara. She was the first specific Buddhist goddess seemingly to be evolved, and at that epoch probably the only one yet evolved. The other tantric female deities previous to this period being nearly the Brahmanist goddesses, for the tantric feature of Buddhism appears to go back to the beginning of that religion, to Chanda, the apparent prototype of Tara. The functions of the popular Tara, the deliveress, Tarika, lent themselves to this extension of her sphere to include protective charms with their background of nihilistic mysticism. Tara was personified illusion as well as energy, whilst she was the mother of the Buddhas and consort of the Buddhist Lord of the World, Avalokita. She also incorporated the aboriginal productive goddesses Mother Earth, Dharani, and prosperity, and one of her favorite titles was the Rescuer from Death, Mrityu Vankana. The new goddesses were thus were made to be in the main reflexes from Tara, as is evidenced by their form, emblems, and secondary titles, and by the direct mention of such identity in some of the later Dharani texts, e.g. Siddhapatra. Their form generally resembling that of Tara was approximated to that of the meditative Buddha by representing them as seated in the Buddha pose instead of standing or semi-standing as Tara is usually figured, after the ancient fashion at Barhut. They were clothed with some of Tara's attributes and emblems, e.g. her lotus to Prajnaparamita and others, her vase of life-giving ambrosia to Mayuri. Many are associated and interchangeable with Tara. In triad groups of Tara and her consort Avalokita, these spell goddesses take the place often which is usually assigned to Tara herself. 3 of such interchanges are seen in the Indian sculptures of the 7th-9th century AD, previously published by me, namely the mother of the 6-syllabled spell, Sadaksari Matri, Manidara, or Pratisara, and Vasudhara. And others are now given in this article in plates. A recognized trio of Tara is Varada, or the bestower, a white form of which I've described, depicts that goddess with Maha Mayuri on her right and Jamguli on her left. Tara is also an attendant on Prajnaparamita. Tara exchanges titles with several of these spell goddesses. Thus, she is surnamed Usnisa Vijaya Tara as well as Jamguli Tara. A form, as we will see, of the peacock snake spell, whilst her also are almost specific titles of Arya, noble, Bhattarika, reverend, Matri, mother, six-armed, etc., are shared with others. Like Tara and her modes, each of the great spell goddesses is allotted to one or other of the 5 supernatural Dhyani Buddhas, as a female reflex or energy, as I have pointed out elsewhere. From this, it is seen that Maha Mayuri is assigned as a reflex to the Buddha Amoga Siddhi, whose conventional gesture is named the bestowing, the blessing of fearlessness, which is the avowed object of the spells, and whose color is green, suggestive of the ordinary peacock. Tara's consort, Avalokita, is described in some of the later mystical Dharanis as the receiver of certain of these spells from Buddha, and he probably symbolized the spell in earlier images, just as we will find that Vajrapani did. Forms of the new spell deities. The spell deities thus created mostly in the form of reflexes from the primary Buddhist goddess Tara, were each assigned specifically distinctive attitudes and emblems expressive of their particular function. Thereby the images are distinguished from those of Tara and from one another, and as also from the different modes of the same goddess. For each of these deities is assigned a variety of forms, the inventions manifestly of later ages, partly to symbolize a specialization or extension of function, but mainly the result of adapting these gods to the popular craze for demoniacal goddesses of the type current in contemporary Shaivist Brahmanism. Thus originally placid and benign Buddhist divinities became latterly transformed into the warrior type like Durga, and armed with weapons to fight the Brahmanist and aboriginal devils in the interest of the votaries of the particular spell goddess. In this way, nearly all of these goddesses have come eventually to exhibit, like Tara herself, 3 classes of modes: placid, stern or severe, and fierce. When two or more of these modes are superposed on one body, there result monstrous, many-armed, and it may be many-headed figures. In the latter case, the central face represents the placid mode, and the lowest pair of arms the natural ones. The earlier forms or modes are presumably the placid, simpler, and non-monstrous kind, like the earlier sculptures of Tara and of the goddesses at Barhut, etc. Then, the earlier warrior type was not monstrous, as is seen in the White Thunderbolt wielder, figure 8, where the extra weapons are disposed around the two-armed figure or assigned to his reflexes or associates. The following descriptions of the stereotyped forms of these deities have not hitherto been published and are translated from the Sadhana collection of Zālu, above cited. The sun myth in respect to Buddha appeared to have dominated the creation of these spell deities. The various new divinities in their multiform modes seems to me to fall into three groups or types, corresponding broadly to the stages in the development of that myth, where Buddha takes the place of the sun god in protecting the people against the demons of darkness, the snake demons, Naga, by his spells. The magical Parita, Vidyā, or Dharani formulae are described in the texts as the product of Buddha himself and his human predecessors, the Tathagatas. But when the mystic product was deified, we have seen that it was given the character of a female Buddha, the Blessed Lady, Bhagavati, or Buddha's mother, and identified chiefly with Tara. This type, forming apparently the earliest, may be called 1. Buddha's mother peacock sunbird type. The protective deity, whilst assigned anthropomorphic form, retains as her or his vehicle the golden peacock, that is, the pre-Vedic symbol of the primordial god of nature and sky, the sunbird, the vanquisher of the snake demons. It has Tara, or her consort Avalokita, as chief. The second group, of the warrior style, conceives the protective deity in the guise of the great elemental god, the thunderbolt wielder, Vajrapani, the later Brahmanist form of the preeminent and withal benign god of the sky, Indra, or Jupiter. This type may be termed the thunderbolt peacock sunbird type. It has Vajrapani, or his female energy, as the chief. The early forms of this type, as seen in the accompanying photographs of hitherto unpublished ancient Indian Buddhist images, represent a new form of Vajrapani as riding on the golden peacock. The third and latest group is of the fiercest warrior model and represents the destructive aspect of the sun, analogous to the Moloch mode of the Semitic sun god Baal. It reflects the demonist development of later contemporary Brahmanism, which conceived the protecting deity to be of the destructive she-devil type of Durga, or of Vajrapani in his fiercest aspect, in which Shiva, the god of the Vidyadharas, becomes more prominent as the demon Mahakala, and his vehicle, the peacock, is exchanged for the terrible Garuda, the later form of sunbird of the Brahmins, and the deadly subduer of snake demons. To this class belongs the tearing thunderbolt, the thunderbolt beak, the red copper beak, the thunderbolt claw, the great averter of harm, Mahapratyamgira, etc. This may be called the thunderbolt Garuda sunbird type. Buddha's mother peacock sunbird type. This, the first type, personifying the first and greatest of the spells ascribed to the Buddha, namely the golden peacock snake talisman, Mora Parita, or Mahamayuri charm, is well illustrated in the form preserved in Japan, figure 4. It represents the Buddha as seated upon the golden peacock and is entitled Buddha's Mother, the Great Peacock. And the accompanying text states, the Peacock Sutra says those who recite the divine spell, literally imprecation, of the peacock bright king will be bespoken 100 years old age, may hope for 100 autumns. The golden peacock is described as of the color of gold with 2 eyes like the gunja fruit, rati seeds, Abrus precatorius, and a coral beak, and 3 red streaks ran round his throat and down the middle of his back. Of the goddess Tara model, generally represented of a white complexion, the simplest form of this type seems to be the noble white umbrella, to turn away harm, Arya Sitapatra, or Sitatapatra. This represents the spell goddess, figure 5, of generally natural form, seated in the Buddha pose with her left hand holding a white umbrella and the right in the protesting gesture. Although this is now regarded as a mild form of the fierce Sitatapatra Aparajita, it probably represents, I think, an earlier form of the great peacock or Maha Mayuri goddess. For the popular pentad of spells known as the Five Protectors, Pancaraksa, by the Nepalese, in which the Maha Mayuri is the oldest in chief, is termed by the Tibetans the Five Umbrellas, Tibetan Grva Lunha. Moreover, it will be seen in figure 7 that Maha Mayuri in her 8-armed form holds in the exactly corresponding hand, the normal or lower left, an umbrella as this goddess does. The third eye in her forehead does not occur in the description, and is doubtless a later addition by an artist to adapt her to the fierce character of her modern namesake, who has incorporated the functions of Mayuri. The description of this form by Zialu is here translated. The revered one of the white umbrella, Arya Sitapatra, Piagsma Gadubs Dekarmo. She is of white complexion and shining. Her right hand is in the protecting gesture, Sarana Mudra, and her left holds a white umbrella. She sits in the Vajrasana, Buddha-like pose, and is adorned with silks and jewels. The umbrella here is manifestly the white umbrella symbolizing sovereignty, rather than a defensive instrument against swarms of noxious things. It may have been suggested, I think, by the incident related in the Kulahamsa Jataka, in which Buddha, as the king of the golden geese, i.e., as we have seen a form of the golden peacock, received the white umbrella of sovereignty for his preaching of the law. The snake-charming mode of the peacock goddess as Gergely Tara, or Tibetan Dug Selma Surgolma, or Tara, the speller of poison, is very interesting and significant. See figure 6. It connotes the peacock sunbird with the incantation personified as the Brahmanist goddess of speech, Sarasvati, with her lyre. She is white in color with 2 pairs of arms, one pair playing the lyre, in the right hand of the other holding uplifted a white, that is subdued and harmless, snake, whilst other white snakes are worn as ornaments, and the left hand is in the reassuring gesture, abhaya, giving the blessing of fearlessness. She is seated behind a corpse, evidently the victim of snakebite. Of other forms of Jamguli, without the designation Tara, one is in normal form with the left hand holding a snake, and the right a banner, i.e. the spell. Others are more recent and monstrous with 3 heads, etc. The great peahen goddess, queen of the magic art, Maha Mayuri Vidyā Rajni, in a developed form on the warrior model with multiple arms and heads. Figure 7. This 8-armed mode of the figure is not described by Zialu, but the following 6-armed form is. Buddha's mother, peacock sunbird type. Golden peacock snake spell deified as Buddha's mother, the great peafowl, Buddha Matrika Maha Mayuri. The white umbrella against harm, Arya Sitapatra. Peacock goddess as snake charmer, Jamguli Tara. The great peahen as warrior, Maha Mayuri Vidyā Rajni. Note, umbrella is held in left normal lower hand as in figure above. The remaining 4 of the 5 protectors or umbrellas are known only in their later monstrous forms as the warrior model. They are Maha Pratisara, the great transformer or wanderer, the queen of magic art. She is gold-colored with 8 arms and 4 faces, which latter are yellow, white, blue, and red respectively, and she has 3 eyes of a Shiva. Her 4 right hands hold a sword, wheel, trident, and arrow. The 4 left hold a vajra, snare, axe, and bow. She sits in semi-active pose with her left leg pendant. Maha Mantra Nudari, holder of the spell to accomplish desires. Pratisara is a form of Manidari and disclosed by her mantra. Sitavati and Sahasra Pramardani have been described. The deified Prajna Paramita, personifying illusion and productive energy, as the universal mother and mother of the omniscient one, i.e. Buddha, is represented of this milder Tara type, though obviously not associated with the peacock. Her strictly natural aspect in her earlier form and the artistic description of that image are, it seems to me, in keeping with the probability that she was created by the great teacher Asanga, circa 5th century AD, on the Prajna Paramita doctrine, into whom the first description of her image is ascribed. Sita Prajna Paramita, Tibetan Serapyin, transcendental wisdom. The Great Mother is white as the autumn moon with 1 face and 2 arms. She sits in the Buddha-like pose, Vajrasana, and her hair floats downwards towards her left shoulder. Her 2 hands are in the gesture of preaching the law. In the palm of the right is a white lotus, and from the left a red lotus issues, the flowers of which open at the level of her ear and support the Prajna Paramita book. Her waist is slender and her breasts full. She is in her 16th year and is adorned with silks and jewels. Another variant of same is thus described in STM number 72, Vajra Panjara, or Prasad, Tibetan Rijager, and shows how the descriptions were rigorously adhered to. Prajna Paramita is white with 2 hands in the gesture of preaching the law. According to the official pattern, she holds a red lotus in the right hand and a book in the left. But according to the esoteric pattern, she holds a white lotus which comes out of the palm of her right hand, and in the left she holds a red lotus, inside of which is the Prajna Paramita book. She sits in the Vajrasana pose. Several specimens of this form I have found in the ancient Indian sculptures of Magadha, and a fine one from Java dating to 9th century AD is in the Leiden Museum. Thunderbolt Peacock Sunbird type. This second type represents the change from the benign Tara and Avalokita of the benign sun myth to the elemental god of the sky personified as the thunderbolt wielder Vajrapani, who is represented as the spell protector. This intermediate stage is preserved in the ancient Indian sculptures of the 7th to 9th centuries AD, here published for the first time, figures 8 and 9. It did not apparently prove popular as it is not found in ordinary modern usage, the tendency having been towards fiercer female forms of the popular Durga style and Shaivism, which form the third type. In these sculptures, the god is seen as adorned with snakes and holding a snare or noose to capture the snake demons, and seated Buddha-wise upon a throne supported by peacocks. In the white form of the god, to his front and below him are 3 of the greatest of the demons, Kanda, Kundala, and Akala. The former, who is mentioned in the Atharva Veda as having daughters who were she-devils, is described in the Jatakas as being Naga King, who was an enemy of Buddha, whilst the latter was king of the birds, that is, as the king of the golden geese or golden peacocks herein represented. On each side of the gods sits as 2 associates or reflexes the effacer of stains, Sarva Nivarana Vitskamben, and the entirely virtuous one, Samantabhadra. It is notable that the god is given a strictly natural form, his extra emblems and weapons being disposed around him or held by his assistants, and not placed in additional and monstrous pairs of hands. In the blue mode of the god, his form is generally similar to the white, and he is mounted on peacocks. In front of him stands the Fury styled, the fierce one with the blue stick. Nila Danda Kroda, whom I have noted as an attendant on Tara in her mode as the rescuer from death, who is a Brahmanist form of Yama, the god of death. They are thus described by Zialu. Sita Vajrapani, or Tibetan Pyag Ridor Ziba Dekarpo, the mild, white, thunderbolt-handed. He is mild, white in color, with one face and two arms. He holds a Vajra noose and snakes circle his arms and ankles. In front is the fierce Ekala, or Echala, Mi Gyoba, with Kanda, Gatumpo, Naga King, on his right, and Kundala, Rutsis Kyilpa, on his left. On the right of the chief is the effacer of stains, Sirgibpa Ranamsel, and on the left the entirely virtuous one, Kuntsu Bazanpo. Also, around him, the jewel, lotus, sword, wheel, and crossed Vajras. Also, Nila Vajrapani, the mild blue thunderbolt-handed, Pyagrador Ziba Sananpo. This Vajrapani is mild blue in color with one face and two arms. He holds the crossed Vajras joined to a noose. He sits with legs flexed up in a subactive pose and is adorned with silks and jewels. In front sits the fury Niladanda, whose right hand holds a stick and the left in the pointer finger gesture. The effacer of stains is probably a personification of purifying rain extracted from the Naga cloud demons, for Buddha delivers to this god the sutra entitled The Cloud Jewel. The Thunderbolt Garuda Sunbird type. This type represents the destructive aspect of the sun and thereby also of Buddha as identified with the archaic sun god bird. That the mild Buddha should within a few centuries of his death be identified with the fierce and bloodthirsty Garuda seems at first sight incredible, but the evidence on which I now venture to announce this identity appears to be indisputable. This discovery forms another important link in the chain of evidence which I have recently put forward to show the process by which the Buddha became deified and the origin of the most popular form of the deified Sakyamuni, namely the sun god Buddha Amitabha, the definite light in his western paradise of the sun. What is manifestly an early form of the evolution of that deity I recently discovered amongst 2nd century BC sculptures of Bharut in the statue inscribed Chakavako Nagaraja, that is, the golden goose, the king of the Nagas. This I have proved to be the early title of the Buddhist god of the western quarter of the universe, at a time when Buddha as the golden goose form of the sunbird was a favorite theme in the Jataka narratives of the Buddha's births. Now, a further intermediate stage in the process of this evolution is obviously found in the later type of the Dharani sunbird as the Garuda. The inscription also in the Garuda charm here figured, I find, applies to that bird the special titles of Buddha in addition to its own of Lord of the Nagas by conquest, and it appears to me probable that it was this substitution of the Garuda with its terrible eyes which suggested the later epithet of the Buddhist regent of the West, namely Virupaksa, or deformed eyes, when Buddha as Amitabha had become differentiated as the supreme and benign god. This identity of the Garuda with Buddha is confirmed, I find, by the Pandara Jataka, number 518, which ascribes to Buddha the statement that he was the Garuda king, who acquired the secret of killing snakes and who preached the law. In this Thunderbolt Garuda type, the destroying aspect of the thunderbolt wielder is intensified and associated with the terrible Garuda, the later Brahmanist development of the sunbird, who according to Brahmanist myth stole the ambrosia of the gods and smashed the thunderbolt of Indra, and hence is styled the subduer of the thunderbolt, Vajrajit, and vanquisher of Indra or Vajrapani, Surendrajit, or Surendrajit. This supremacy of the Garuda over Vajrapani is expressed in some of the later Dharanis, bearing that bird's titles of the Iron Beak, Red Copper Beak, Thunderbolt Beak, Thunderclaw, Tearing Thunderbolt, see foregoing list. It was this destructive aspect of the paramount Garuda, a bird which not only dominated the sky, but dived to the deepest hells, which no doubt led to his association with the demoness mode of the storm god Shiva or Rudra, namely Mahakala, with his troops of female furies or mother energies of the Durga type, many of whom now obtain from the Buddhist monks the title of Vajra and become the chief goddesses of the later spells. As a result, we now find a demonist mode of Tara as Vajratara or the Tara Thunderbolt, and later the fiercest of all, the Sitatapatra Aparajita Dharani, in which Tara in the personified spell becomes the female counterpart of the Garuda, in which the title of the female thunderbolt beak, Vajratundi, that is, the female Garuda itself. Here, the transformation of Buddha's mother from the golden peacock sunbird to the Garuda sunbird stands completely revealed. On the other hand, the bountiful and auspicious aspect of the storm god Mahakala or Rudra appears in his character as the good wind genius, the lord of the earth's produce and of the wreath-bringing vidyādharas, possessing of healing remedies, jalasa basaja, and of the hidden treasures of the earth. Such functions naturally led to his being made by the Buddhists to defend the defender of their vidyā magic arts and of the healing spells with the title of Lord of Occult Knowledge, Jnana Natha, and a similar title is accorded to the Garuda as protector of the spells. This latter form of the Garuda is here described and is interesting besides as depicting the physical form of that sunbird as conceived by the Indian Buddhists in the early centuries of our era. See also Figure 10. Jnana Garuda, or Tibetan Yeses Pyunkra, the Garuda bird of transcendental knowledge. He has one face and two arms. His color from the sole of the feet up to the thigh is yellow, thence to the navel white, thence to the throat red, thence to the brow black, and thence upward it is green. He has 3 eyes and is adorned with 8 great nagas in the shape of serpents. The wings emit many rays of light. His head is adorned with a chaplet of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. He seizes a venomous naga king in his 2 hands and eats it, holding the tail down his feet. See also Garuda Samvara Kakra. The remarkable adaptation of this archaic sunbird myth to Sakyamuni as protector of Buddhist spells is well illustrated in the above picture spell. Here the Garuda displays on its breast the Buddhist creed, expressing the essentials of Buddha's doctrine and several other formulas. The palms of its hands or wing talons bear crude Sanskrit legends. On each plume of the outstretched wings, which from the above description may represent rays of light, is inscribed the incantation Om Visa Krili Mili Halaya Svaha, that is, Hail Poison, Destroyer, Krili Mili Hala, O God of the fire sacrifice, i.e. the sun. Here poison is avowedly the primary object of the spell and manifestly snake poison, as expressed by the snake in the Garuda's beak. It also seems significant that the incantation Krili Mili is practically identical with the magical expression found in the middle of the peacock snake spell, namely Kili Hi Mili and Kili Mili, so as almost to suggest that this may be a contracted form of the Mayuri spell adapted to the Garuda. The inscriptions on its palms and around the inner circle of its breast read as undernoted. The words in italics are the more obvious Sanskrit equivalents as kindly restored by Dr. Hornell, but for the tentative translations I am responsible. 1. On Psalms. Om Byam Satrirvada Nam Kam Jam Ram. Byam Satrubhadya Nama Ramatam. Translation. Om Byam, salutation to the harasser of enemies. May he be pleased to break up and devour. 2. On the inner circle. Mahaguru, Uhaguru, Trikaguru Nam. Mahagurave, Trikagurave Nama. Salutation to the great teacher, the teacher of reason, the teacher of the three gems, Triratna. Naga Sara, Ram Ram, Dol Dol, Nagajit, Atho Naga Kudali, Nagasvara, Ramatu Ramatu, Nagarji Tartha. The Lord of the Nagas, may he be pleased, he who possesses the wealth acquired by the Nagas. Dasa Ganyu, Mamam Yogasa, Sarva Visa Raksa, Dasagana, Sarva Visebhya Raksatu. Thee of the 10 troops of female energies, may he protect from all poisons. A milder style of the Garuda as a snake charmer is preserved in Japan, representing that bird playing a flute. It is analogous to the peacock mode of the dispeller of poison playing a lute. Its text reads, the Garulu king, the flowery, majestic, golden-winged Garulo bird with the jewel on his head. An early form of this Garuda thunderbolt type was found by me in an ancient Indian sculpture of about the 8th century AD from Magadha, figure 12, and identified by an expert lama. It represents the tearing thunderbolt, Vajra Vidarana, and is described by means of Zalu. It still retains the milder aspect of the earlier Indian statues, but a later and fiercer mode is cited underneath it. Nila Vajra Vidarana, the dark blue tearing thunderbolt. She is dark indigo colored. Her right hand uplifted holds a 5-tipped Vajra, and the left a bell resting on her body. Her gray hair stands on end, and her left leg is pendant. Her lower garment is a tiger skin, and her ornaments are snakes. She stands amid heaps of fire. The warrior styles of the spell goddesses mostly all belong to this type, such as the fierce modes of Usnisa Vijaya and of the white umbrella, Sitatapatra. In her modes is the invincible against others. Aparajita, which was the title of one of the Rudra storm gods, as well as the great Naga demon, and the great averter of harm, Mahapratyamgira. The many-headed forms incorporate also the earlier simple and placid modes, and thus represent a complex conglomerate personality. Thus, it is expressly claimed for the Aparajita form of the white umbrella in her Dharani that she incorporates in herself a great variety of goddesses, including not only the placid forms of Tara, but the Udra and Kanda forms of Durga, the female Vajrapani and the female thunderbolt beak, Vajratundi, that is, the female counterpart of the Garuda. The following descriptions of some of her own and allied images are translated from Zialu. The 1,000-armed and million-eyed form suggests Tara's consort of Alokita, and what has been supposed to be made of that god in the Nepalese miniature of the 11th century bears the masculine title of Sitatapatri Bhattaraka. Sitatapatra, Aparajita, the white umbrella invincible against others. She is white in color with a gold-handled white umbrella over her head. She has 3 faces, each 3-eyed. The middle face is white, the right blue, and the left red. In her 3 right hands she holds a vajra, arrow, and hook. In the 3 left, the pointing gesture, snare, and bow. In addition, she possesses in a halo 1,000 heads and 1,000 hands which hold different kinds of weapons such as vajra, wheel, jewel, lotus, sword, arrow, hook, bow, hammer, and snare. She has 1,000,000 eyes and sits on fiery heaps. Mahapratyamgira, the great averter of harm. She is black with 1 face and 6 arms. The 3 right hands hold sword, iron hook, and charity gesture. The 3 left hold red lotus, trident, and snare with pointing finger against her heart. She is adorned with silks and jewels and all the dress of a fierce deity or Krodha. She sits with her left leg pendant. Aparajita, invincible against others. She is yellow with her right hand in praying gesture and left holds a snare with pointing finger gesture. She is naked and adorned with jewels, and she sits with left leg fixed and right pendant upon and suppressing Ganapati or Ganesha, a Naga. Pita Aparajita, the yellow one invincible against others. Her body is yellow, she has 3 eyes and clenched teeth. She is handsome but fierce, and is in the dress of a mild goddess. Her right hand is in the pose of clapping the hands together, and the left holds a snare over her heart with a pointing finger gesture. Her right leg is pendant and rests upon the elephantine Ganesha. Brahma holds an umbrella over her head, and other gods worship her, or worship here. She sits amid hoops and flames. Others of these spell goddesses are Bhattaritya Vaidhi, the revered one of the Vedas, and she is red with one face and four-armed. The first pair of hands is joined fashion fold, a vajra hook and snare, and the lower pair an arrow and bow. She stands and is adorned with silks and jewels. And Graha Matrika Vidya Rajni, mother of eclipsing planets, queen of magic art. She is white in color with three faces, white, blue, and red, each with three eyes. Of the three hands, the first pair are in preaching the law gesture, the second pair hold a vajra and lotus, and the third pair an arrow and bow. She sits in the Vajrasana, Buddha-like pose, fully adorned as a goddess. Artistically, one of the most striking features of these representations of the various series of deities personifying the ancient spells is the restrained and natural treatment of even the fiercer forms by the earlier Buddhist artists, as compared with the more monstrous creations of a later period. Conclusions. This research throws important light upon the history of Buddhism. It shows that Buddha himself probably employed protective spells, and it reveals the manifest origin of a large section of the Buddhist pantheon, and sources of which were previously unknown. Some of the particular facts and conclusions which emerge from this research are: 1. Spells are in universal and cherished use by all Buddhists, both in the South and North, and play an important part in their religion. 2. The origin and use of protective spells in India is traced from pre-Vedic times, circa 2000 to 1500 BC. 3. The cult of protective spells was widely prevalent in pre-Buddhist India at the time of Buddha's birth, circa 567 BC. 4. Buddha probably did himself utter and recommend the golden peacock snake spell, Paritta or Dharani, as circumstantially recorded in the early Pali texts, a spell which contains nothing inconsistent with a date within Buddha's lifetime, and which is in universal use amongst all Buddhists. 5. The golden peacock of this spell is a favorite incarnation of Buddha in the Jatakas, and appears to be Buddha himself grafted upon the archaic pre-anthropomorphic myth of the sun as the golden-winged bird, Roc or Roc of Irania, the phoenix or fang of China, the golden goose or golden peacock or Garuda of India, which dissipates the spirits of evil personified as serpents, nagas, and dragons. 6. Buddha, by associating his personality with this myth in his Jatakas, as with many of the other heroic myths current in his time, thereby contributed towards his own future deification, if the Jatakas be accepted as authentic. 7. This conception of Buddha as the golden peacock is shown to be probably an early stage of Buddha's anthropomorphic deification, circa 2nd century BC, as the divine Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light in his Western paradise, to which all the suns hasten. The goal of the majority of professing Buddhists, and where Buddha Amitabha is representing as sitting upon a throne of golden peacocks. 8. This association of Buddha with the archaic sunbird in the form of the golden peacock or goose, as latterly the Garuda, may explain the motive for the frequent occurrence of these birds in Buddhist architecture, surmounting pillars, architraves, or screens on the keystones of arches. 9. From this golden peacock snake spell, and possibly others, as a model, a great body of other spells, also ascribed to Buddha, was invented subsequently to Buddha's death. The origins and approximate dates of the different strata of this spell literature is traced by means of their mythology, etc.